Okay, I am live at the moment. Okay. Ooh. Oh, I have. So this is something good to know. I have been looking at you guys here. Hi Dan. Hi Lucky. First, I'm doing a stream and I didn't click go live. I was streaming, but I didn't go live. Never. So sorry about that. You guys have been waiting here. I'm really sorry. Actually, you can see that I have been doing some shit around. But yeah, this is the first time that I do a stream. Sorry about that. I'm going to start from scratch again. So as mentioned before, when I was just talking to myself, basically, is that today I was in just looking at the my Twitter feed and I found this guy Lucky Israel that he posts some code, and I just made a comment on his code whether it'd be good that he doesn't create manually the HTTP client. And from there, we start talking about, oh, is it okay if I just go and do a review of your code live? And he said, yeah, that's fine, perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the code that he has. I'm going to be focusing basically on basic aspects that I see on an SDK built in .NET, things that I see here on GitHub, and some coding improvements that we can do. So what I did is the first thing that I did is increasing the level of microphone. Okay, yeah, good. I wish I knew how to do that. That's pretty good. Okay, probably like this is better. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. I hope it's good. Sorry, my voice is not the best. I have been in bed with the flu for the last 3 days. Today is the first time that I actually can speak and think without being with a massive headache. Sorry about that. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this code of Lucky Israel. He's building a .NET SDK for Circle, which is a blockchain. I thought about doing this, something like this, a couple of months ago. I saw the project, sounded really interesting, but lucky that he actually grabbed it. So from what I saw on his LinkedIn profile, he is a React developer and he's starting his journey into .NET, and that explains a little bit of the things that I'm seeing at the moment, which I'm gonna try to help him to polish a little bit of things and just explain a little bit what I look or what I see when I look at the code. So the first thing that I did is I fork his repo into mine, and what I'm going to do is I am going to remove what I did. So I'm gonna explain step by step again what I did. So the first thing is I'm going to clone the code in my machine. And I'm going to inspect what is there. And the first thing that I see looking at the structure folder, don't be scared, it's gonna be fine, don't worry. The first thing that I see is based on the structure and the folders that I see here is that Lucky Israel, sorry, I don't know your name, he committed the bin and the object folders. These are two folders that you don't want to commit. This is like committing the node modules in a Angular or React project. So one of the things that you want to do is get rid of these two folders, the bin and the object folders. So I'm going to delete this. And the next thing that I want to make sure is that I actually commit this basically. And once I have this, I'm going to add a git ignore project, git ignore file, git ignore, and I'm not gonna actually remember exactly what is there. I'm just gonna go and copy paste one of my git ignore files for .NET, and that basically is going to help me to work in .NET, and none of the .NET compiled binary files or libraries or any setting that Rider generates will be pushed into GitHub. So cool, that's what I did. And I did this in 2 steps because this is the way that you make sure that they don't show up again. if you just add a git ignore and you don't delete them before, these files, the compile, the libraries, everything is gonna stay there. So now that you have this, I just gonna commit this, add git ignore, and that's it. So now if I go here, the other thing that I see is that this repo doesn't have a .NET solution. A .NET solution is basically a file that allows you to group different projects in .NET, and you want to use .NET solutions so you can have multiple projects. Ideally, in an SDK like the one that you are building, you want two projects. The project where your code lives and the project where you add your test. If you don't have a .NET solution, you can have them, but it will become a little bit more difficult to use an IDE and manage things together. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to create a new file. I just forgot how to create that file here. I'm going to create a source folder and I'm going to create a test folder, and then I'm going to move all of the code that you have into this source folder. Good. So now I have a source folder and the test folder, and what I want to do now is I want to have a .NET solution here. So in order to do that, I'm going to open Rider. I'm going to create a new solution and I'm going to put it there. Basically here I am going to add solution, empty solution. I'm going to call the solution Circle.net. And what I can do now is I'm going to add two solution folders. These are not going to be real folders. These are folders that will group logically things. And I'm going to create a source folder where I'm going to put all my projects that are not test. And in my test folder, I'm going to create projects to do testing. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to add the project that you created. Just let me, there you go, it's here, but it's not there. Why it's not, oh, circle.net, what is there? Oh, because, why it's not showing up here? Where did I move things? Okay, now it shows up. Okay, so I'm gonna add this project, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build this, and it's building. That's good. But the first thing that I notice when I do this is that there are a lot of warnings. So there are warnings that are telling you that you cannot convert a null to a non-nullable reference type. And there are non-nullable properties that must be initialized. There are a couple of things here that I see that when I create an SDK, I don't like to see, because these warnings are telling me something about the code. So one of the things that I recommend to you is that you actually add treat warnings as errors. This, what it's going to do, is going to make that your project stop building, and basically you're not going to be able to work until you fix all of these errors that before were warnings but now are errors. This is going to make your code more reliable and safe for other people that use it too. So I'm not going to do that now because that's going to take a lot of time. You can see there are so many errors here. So some homework for you is to add treat warnings as errors. That's like a must every time that I start a new project at the moment. and use that basically. So treat warnings as error, that's something that you want to add. Now, the next thing that I'm going to take a look at is what we talk in Twitter, basically, is the use of the HTTP client that is here. Another thing that I recommend now is something that is also quite new at the moment. Well, not new, but it's something that is more used, is using file scope namespaces. So this will change and you will have a namespace. This reduces nesting and that is really good. So make use of namespaces as file scope. Good. So I mentioned on Twitter, and this is the first thing that I told you, that don't create the HTTP client here for several reasons. You don't know, or you still haven't decided how this is going to be consumed. Is going to be created one per HTTP request call. If someone is using this in an API, you don't know if this is going to be used in a background service. You don't know much. But what we do know is that if you create one HTTP client and you dispose them constantly, you can get actually a problem, like I mentioned in Twitter, to you, that you can make that you can create a exhaustion, basically, like a socket exhaustion in your application. Many of them can end up making that the consumer of your library is going to have exceptions during runtime, and you don't want that. So in order to solve this first problem, what I would suggest is that instead of creating the HTTP client here, you actually pass the HTTP client but you don't pass the API key here. What you want to do is assign the HTTP client here, and you want to initialize this HTTP client in some sort of configuration of your app. Yeah, like Dan is saying, because you have here a dispose. Every time that someone disposes this Circle client, you will generate, depending on how many times this happens, you can generate an exhaustion in your application, or actually the person that is using it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this disposable pattern from here, because I'm going to allow the dependency injection engine to deal with the lifetime of this Circle client. And what I want to do now is this configuration that we have here, I am going to send this to another file, which at the moment I'm going to create this here just to don't miss the visualization, but I'm going to create a static class called service collection extensions. This, some people call it service extensions pattern. For me, this is just a regular service extension. So what I want to see here is a method that will receive an iService collection, which is the dependency injection engine from .NET, where we are going to register. Yeah, everything is a pattern. I saw that. So you want to register the HTTP client that then is going to be injected into your Circle client, and the dependency injection engine from .NET is going to manage the lifetime and is going to reuse HTTP clients, so you don't have these problems with HTTP client. In order to do that, what you want to do is add this dependency injection package, We will deal with the versions later. Probably I'm going to do that in another video, but for now what I'm going to do is focusing on the minor things that we saw. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add this method, and then I'm going to return the services. This is another good practice. You always want to return the service collection here, so you can change this in another places. Now, the other thing that you want to do is you probably don't want to pass the API key here. You probably want to be able to get the API key from the configuration. Also, you want to get the base URL from configuration, because this base URL might be different when you're integrating with the sandbox chain or the test chain than the production chains, the lab Circle chain. So I'm going to assume that this is going to be the test chain, and what you want to do is you want to get this from a configuration. So how you can do that? There are several ways. You can find a lot of examples on how to do it. I'm just gonna do one, but you can search how to provide configuration values into the HTTP client. So in order to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a record called Circle API options. There you go. I don't like options this way. I like my options to have real properties. And there you go. So now I'm going to have a Circle API options. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to register options. What was it? Register options. .NET add options. There you go. So it was get section by position options, get section. It was not this, the options button. This is what I'm looking. Configure, build service configure. So if I configure, probably I need to add a package. What is the NuGet package? Validation, no, so this is in a different NuGet package. Configure naming options, configure, probably it's on the binder. If it's in the binder package, probably. Configure, yeah, it's here. No, it's not here. Add options. What is this? Configure, injection. I'm just trying to find where is the NuGet package that I need to add for this. Configuration settings. Let me see if I can find this with like this. This is a regular DLL. Oh, yeah, that's a good thinking. Yeah, it's a regular DLL. So, where I find this? Okay, there you go. Microsoft dependent, Microsoft extensions, configurations. There you go. I think it's this one. There you go. Yeah. So you can configure options this way. Basically, what this is going to do is going to allow to inject an object of type iOptions, where you can then access your configuration. But you want to do this binding on a specific section. So you want to do this. Can you get this with SP? Yes. What is this? Circle options? No, you cannot do this. You have to pass the configuration here. So you pass the configuration. So the consumer of your SDK will configure the app configuration and is going to allow that to have your Circle API options. Now, what .NET is doing at this moment is going to try to find a Circle API section in the configuration of the application and is going to bind that to these Circle API options. So imagine that you have environment variables, and if you have environment variables, you can have one that is going to be something like this. You can have something that says Circle API base URL, and you can have Circle API key, and you have this. If you have these two environment variables, and in your application you configure your application to use environment variables, .NET will automatically bind this base URL to this base URL property, and it's gonna bind this, your API key, to this API key object. So at the moment of registering the HTTP client, what you can do here is you can actually access options base URL, and you can define options as this, basically. As you can see here, now I can get my Circle API options from the dependency injection provider. I can get my options, and then I can get the API key, and I can get the base URL. So you can use the request headers here. You can also configure the request header here, because you know that it's always going to be JSON. You can also configure here the authorization, and that's it. So with this, you are basically making sure that the URL can be changed in different environments. You can use this to point to localhost. You can use it actually to use integration testing tool like WireMock, and you don't have hard-coded things in your code, basically. So now you can actually make this your entry point. So the entry point for your SDK is gonna be this method, and you will see I'm going to create now console application. I'm just gonna add a web project that has everything already. Just gonna create a web API, nothing here, just something simple. I'm gonna put it in Circle.net. I'm gonna put this in source here. I'm just gonna create a web application so you can see how to consume that. I'm gonna assume that this already is a NuGet package, so I'm gonna reference that, and when I go to program, I can, in my builder, I can say builder.configuration.add environment variables. This is what I was telling you. If now I set environment variables with the value of Circle API __ API key and base URL, those properties are going to be bind to the options. Now, the next thing that you need to do is in your program, now you have this. What you want to do is actually add your Circle client API. If you do this, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to then inject here your iCircle client. So you can then unit test your code, basically. Now, you want to have here in your SDK, you want to only expose, in this case, because you are integrating with an external API, I suggest that you expose an interface. You don't expose the class itself. Because if you expose an interface, you allow the consumers to mock your interface and they can unit test the code where they call you. So I'm going to do something which is this Circle client. I am going to extract an interface called iCircle client, and I'm gonna select everything public and I'm just gonna put it there. That's it. So now I can actually, the consumers of SDK can unit test their code because they can mock this interface. Ideally, you also want to mock this wallet service, wallet set service, because these also are actually talking using the HTTP client, and you want to allow them to mock the behavior of an input-output process, basically. I have gone through many code to understand that ideally you want to allow people, or you want to mock dependencies that do input-output, like network calls, database calls, file calls. The rest, you don't have to create an interface for everything. If you're calling an HTTP client, use an interface so you can mock it. If you don't call in anything outside, if everything is logic in memory, don't create interfaces. Don't mock any of that. That's a waste of time. And actually your code becomes more dangerous because a lot of the testing that you do is relying on the mock implementation that you have and not in the actual implementation. So you might be doing things on the mock that your code that doesn't actually do. And you're starting to have a lot of false positives and unreliable testing. So, I created this in a place that it shouldn't be, basically. That's really sad. What is this? Oopa, I made a big mess here. Okay, I add this where it shouldn't. Where did I put this? I don't know what's going on with Rider. It's going crazy. Always inject abstractions. Do not inject concrete classes. Yes and no. You can inject concrete classes. There is no harm on injecting concrete classes. And that's part of object-oriented programming. You want objects to interact with each other and do things between each other. If you have a class and it has no value to create an abstract class of that, then don't make an abstract class of that. Sorry, I'm just gonna check something here. Where did I create that? Okay, there you go. Sorry, I did something weird. I'm still recovering from that flu and it's killing me. So I'm gonna do this again. I'm gonna do builder.configuration, add environment variables, and then I'm going to builder.services add circle client. So then you can inject here your circle client. There you go. Good. So now I am going to. Oh god, there is something that is. I think that writer is a little bit stupid today. Anyway, I'm going back to the SDK. So all of these that I mentioned is for you to understand that I think that you should inject the HTTP client and should not create it here. And here is where you have to make a decision on whether you want these other classes that you have to create them manually here, so all of them share the same HTTP client, or you want to have an HTTP client for each one of them. This is something that you have to decide for yourself. I'm not gonna make your decision. And many of these things depends on how you want to build the SDK. The HTTP client is thread safe, so you should be good injecting exactly the same instance in all of the dependencies. So one of the things I recommend is that you define how you want this HTTP client to be shared or not across this. The next question would be, do you actually want to create them here or inject them? Also, that's for you. No, I'm not gonna make a decision on that. There are pros and cons. When I built an SDK that was doing something like this, I injected them here, and then in other places I created them here. There is not like a rule of thumb, it's up to you. But something that I want to address that I saw in your code is, for example, in the wallet service, right? So you are creating an SDK and you have this method which is called create wallet async, and you're passing all of these parameters. Some of these parameters have an idempotency key. Some of these parameters are nullable. And for example, if I take a look at this here, the idempotency key is the first one that is nullable, and the account type is the first one that has a default parameter called AOA, count the same, and metadata can be null. You are working on an SDK based on a definition that someone else did. I think that the first thing to do is to do not have all of these parameters, but actually to have another method called get wallet, create wallet async. And what I would do here is just pass a create wallet request, and that's it. This gives you a lot of flexibility compared to this. I want that this create wallet request, which is one that you're gonna expose outside of your SDK, it doesn't have to be this same create wallet request. So this is going to be like a public wallet request, and this is the one that you use to talk to the API. So this is going to be, this model is going to be probably an internal model. So if I move all of those models into internals, I can let this create wallet, what was this? Wallet service, this create wallet. I can actually make this internal, And you will see now that my wallet is complaining because this create wallet that is internal cannot be part of a public method. But I kind of want to do this. I want to probably have a different model that I expose outside of my SDK, which is different from the model that actually is going to make the underlying call to the API itself. So I'm going to leave this create wallet request as internal, and then I'm going to add another method that doesn't have to have these JSON properties. And I'm going to, okay. I'm going to remove this into the right namespace so they don't collide. And you have here your wallet response. Yeah, I'm just gonna remove this. Okay, I'm gonna remove this just for you to kind of see where I'm going with this. I'm not gonna do all of it because it's going to take me ages. So I just want the request and an empty response. And you want that your wallet, create wallet request, is actually the one that comes from the public models. Now, what you're going to do here is you're actually going to do something like what you're doing here. You're going to create the internal wallet request based on the public wallet request. HTTP request, no, internal request. And this is the one that is actually going to make the ATP call. And this is going to be request. Here you have request block change, request high dependency key, request account type, request.count, and request.metadata to list. What is this? Okay, so this is a list, and there you go. What is this? This is a list of wallet metadata. Okay, so you have to do select new wallet metadata, yeah, name and ref ID. And I'm going to return a new wallet response just for the sake of returning something. There you go. That's it. So what you want to do is you want to be able to provide a public model that then you will end up mapping to the actual HTTP model. And you want to do this so your SDK API will always be stable. So that means that you can expose a iWallet service that will have always this method, and if this one has a single object, you can add here later new properties, and you don't have to play with all the parameters that you have here. The same that you don't have to worry about the position where the parameters are. The other thing that you want is if you have async methods, you want that the last parameter of your method is a cancellation token. This is going to allow propagation when someone wants to cancel the request. Actually, that will be hooked into this cancellation. So if you do async methods, add a cancellation token. Okay, good. So this is the other thing that I would do. Another thing that I would do is you have here this valid block change, which is a hash set, which is good. This is a good choice to make this sort of code, but you don't want to create this every time that you create the wallet async. So something that you can do is with this collection that never changes, you want to get this guy outside of there, and you want to make this, you have two options, and this will depend on how you want to actually create the scope of this class. If you want the wallet service to be a singleton, you can just do it private and that's it. But if your wallet service is not going to be a singleton, what I suggest is that you make this static read only. So you have a single hash set and it's not created every time. Because you defeat the purpose of having a hash set if every time that the code is executed, you create a hash set with exact same values to then search on it. Okay? So that's what I would do. Now, all of this code that you are doing here, obviously, you want to do it here beforehand. And what I would do here is a couple of things. First one is get to play a little bit more with the HTTP client, because HTTP client has a lot of methods that you can use at the moment. So I can do HTTP client. You can post as JSON async. You can pass the internal request, and you can pass, I think that you can choose, yeah, developer wallets and internal request, and you do await. Response message. So now you have your response message here, and you don't have to, do this. You don't have to serialize the object here. That's why I say that we can actually get rid of newtons on JSON. So you delete this. If you have, I guess this is the idempotency key, no, the request ID. You can do this, that's perfectly fine. Now you send, instead of calling send async with a request message, you just post this, and this will automatically handle the way that this serialize. And what you want to do later is you want to actually get the response, and you want your response to be this. So what you can do here is you can have a JSON response wrapper, and you can actually read directly from the content. You don't need to read the content as a string and then deserialize it. You can just use this. But it's important that you actually make this nullable, because this might not be able to deserialize to the object that you have there, or the response is null. So if you make this nullable, you will see that this warning disappears. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you don't want to have warnings. So you want to make this nullable. You want to make your null check here. And if you want here, you can just throw an exception. Just throw your Circle API exception. We can talk about exceptions too, but let's just like fail to create one, whatever, you know, something. What do you have here? You have a status code 200. Response message status code. There you go. Now you can actually return here now your wrapper dot data but obviously you don't want this because this wrapper is your internal model. You want to return a new wallet response, and here you want to fill this with your, there you go, wrapper.data.id address. So you want to map things. One of the things that you want to achieve when you build an SDK is you want to add value to what you are actually getting from the underlying low-level API. So you probably don't want to return the blockchain if the blockchain was specified in the request already, you know? You probably don't want to return the updated date because you just, you know, you just created the wallet, so you know that it's not updated, it's just created. So these are the things that you have to take a look when you create an SDK. Creating an SDK, it's something that is going to add value to the user so they don't have to actually do the manual integration themselves. If your SDK is going to be a one-to-one on every parameter to the API itself, you're not adding much value. Now, at this moment, 2025, just getting a open API specification and map it to objects, everybody can do it. You need to add something that is going to make your SDK attractive for other developers to use it. So that's where I think that you have to go and make these decisions on, okay, I'm going to return this information and not the other because it's redundant and all of those things. So that is why using these methods from the HTTP client, using post as JSON async and read from JSON async, you don't actually need Newton's on JSON because Microsoft already provides serialization out of the box in .NET. This way you reduce the amount of dependencies that the people that is using your library has to bring into their projects. So their Docker images are going to be smaller, build times are going to be reduced, less maintenance and less problems even for you. Newton's on JSON is amazing, but people are getting away from it. And there's a lot of people that is not even using it. I haven't used that for a couple of years already, like at least probably 2-3 years that I don't use it. Sometimes you have to because you're using a library that uses it and you realize that at the end you can actually reference it, but not because you want, but because someone in a deep chain of dependencies is actually referencing Newton's on JSON. But I will not do it. As of 2025, everything that you can do or you want to do with HTTP client, you can manage that with system.json. So that's the other thing that I will take a look at here. Remove Newton's on JSON. So I guess that's basically what I would be focusing. As I mentioned earlier, just to make a summary, is try to target the lowest version of the framework possible so you make your SDK available to a lot of target frameworks. .NET 6, 8, which is the latest LTS, .NET 9, and .NET 10 are going to be targeted by default. If you target .NET Standard, you allow that this is going to be used also in .NET Framework. Probably something that you are not interested in maintaining, probably you do, so make a decision on that. You can target different frameworks too if you want. My last libraries I think that, yeah, so this one that I have, I don't remember. This one targets .NET standard. I think that I'm targeting majority in .NET standard. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, .NET standard. I usually target .NET standard. I think that registrator is one that I'm targeting only .NET framework, .NET Core. Yeah. So yeah, I was using features that were only .NET 8, so I dropped support. But try to always, specifically with this, which is a really good utility, like the one that you are building, try to target a framework that is as low as possible, so you know, have a wider reach. So the silent framework, use treat warning as errors, remove JSON properties, remove newtons on JSON, make a decision on all of these services that you are injecting into your SDK, your Circle client. Add a way of just exposing interfaces. Use this sort of way of allowing consumer of SDK to just register your API like this. And add documentation on how they have to configure the SDK, because they have to provide a section. You have to specify this basically in your documentation, in your README. Add and say like, you have to provide in your configuration an API key and a base URL. You can put here the default, which is production basically, if you want, the live chain. Something that I also do, which is this. I usually don't return this iService collection, but I do this. I return, no. This is something that you don't want. What you want is to do add HTTP client, and in order to do this, you need HTTP. What do you want to say? System HTTP client. Microsoft HTTP. Where was this? There you go. I think it's this. Migration HTTP. Yeah. So you want to add a dependency on Microsoft extensions HTTP, and you register the HTTP client this way, and add HTTP client, and you want to actually add the HTTP client to the Circle client. And you want to be able to configure this here. So here you can get now this. You can do client-based address, client-based request, and you pass authorization here. And this registration object that you have here is not anymore the service collection, but is your HTTP client builder. So what I like to do when I create SDKs for APIs is, in this add Circle client, I do not return the service collection, but I return the HTTP client builder. And I do this so later when you call, let's say that you have your program, right? So I'm going to add a new project here. It's gonna be a web application. I'm gonna put this in the tests. No, it's just, I'm gonna close the solution. Rider is a little bit stupid. Sorry, but Rider is a little bit not liking to do things. There you go. Okay, there you go. Now we're talking. Now I have my application and I'm gonna add, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I have this, I can do builder dot services add circle client, and you can do this, and then what you can do is actually here you install another package called HTTP resiliency was, yeah, there you go, extensions resiliency. And what you can do is to this HTTP client builder, you can add resiliency to this client builder dot add a resilient handler, or you can add a standard resilient handler. So if to your register, instead of returning the service collection, you return this, you will allow that the consumer of your SDK to be able to add automatic retries, for example, which is already built in .NET with this package that is based on Poly. And this gives you resiliency out of the default. You can probably add something here where you add configuration, I will do things automatically, but then you are forcing the consumer of your SDK to always do resiliency even if they don't want to. So give them the freedom to configure resiliency if they want, doing this. And obviously this makes sense when you're working with HTTP clients. If you are not registered HTTP clients, I usually don't do this. But this is just a really nice to have when you build SDKs for HTTP clients. And this makes things so simple later and allows to immediately, people that will use your SDK will be like, okay, this is a really well thought SDK. So those are my kind of things that I will take a look at the moment as of today. There are a couple of more things that we can talk. I guess that the next thing, another day, not today, I really want to go to sleep, I have been out of the flu, but in another session we can go through how we can actually do integration testing with WireMock. So you can do integration testing. In your project is way more important that you add integration testing than unit testing. Because basically your SDK, it's a wrapper over an HTTP call. If you add a lot of unit testing, you're not gonna get much value out of that. You probably are gonna be in a better position if you just add an integration testing. And WireMock.net is really good for that. So yeah, this is something that we can talk. So McGraw hates hard-coded strings. Oh yeah, he's talking about these things. Yeah, obviously, you want to start and you want to iterate over these things. This was a lot of LLM auto-completing, but you want to remove hard-coded strings and you want to place them in different places. What I do is I have an internal constant file where I have strings that I don't want to be exposed outside of my SDK, and I would create, if I want to expose any specific string, for example, I don't know, this, let's say that I want to expose this, I will put that in a constant class that will be exposed as a public. But my general recommendation is that everything that belongs to your SDK, do not expose this as public. Make them internal and make them sealed. This way, you are creating code that nobody can extend because they cannot inherit from this, and it's not exposed outside your SDK. You decide how your SDK is consumed. So you're going to have your client, which is going to be internal and sealed, and people are only going to use your public interface. You know, nobody will ever be able to do new Circle client outside of this DLL is forbidden. People doesn't know how the Circle client is implemented. So you want to create internal sealed class and expose a public interface. That's another good practice when you build SDKs. Okay, I hope this made sense. I'm just tired, my throat doesn't want to speak anymore. Let me know if you are happy with this. Let me know if you want we can do more. I'm probably try to do this a little bit more interactive. This is the first time that I do live streaming. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'm just gonna leave there. I'm gonna publish this. I'm not gonna edit anything. This is gonna go there. If you guys like it, share, subscribe. I don't know that crap that, you know, .NET influencer says. Thank you, McGraw. I don't know your first name. McGraw. What's your name? I don't want to assume. You Bugs Bunny. What's your first name? Because you have been really active. Thank you for all of your comments. I have been reading some of them and really useful. Like, you know your shit, man. So thank you so much for being up to, you know, reading my code and helping also Lucky Israel with this. I hope you enjoy this. And I will probably see you at another time. Thank you guys. Have a lovely evening or have a lovely day, wherever you are.